The air in Los Angeles on that September night in 1997 had a particular weight to it. It wasn't just the usual smog, the hazy blanket of the city's breath, caught in the basin between the mountains and the sea. No, this was heavier, a clinging dampness that promised nothing, least of all the violence that was about to unfold. If you were standing outside the Dunbar Armored depot on Mateo Street, in the industrial heart of the city, you might have felt it, a low electric hum of wrongness, just beneath the surface of the familiar urban drone. But most people were home, the city's rhythm slowing to a late weekend crawl. They were unaware that one of the most audacious thefts in American history was already in motion, a clockwork mechanism of betrayal and greed ticking down to zero. I want you to picture the Dunbar Depot, not as it is now, but as it was then, a fortress, or so it was supposed to be. A sprawling utilitarian complex of pale concrete and steel, surrounded by a high fence crowned with razor wire. Its windows were few, small, and reinforced. Its doors were thick steel, designed to resist anything short of a military assault. Inside, in the vault room, was the lifeblood of the city's stacks and stacks of cash, bundled and boxed, waiting for Monday morning to be fed back into the veins of banks and businesses. Over $18 million, a king's ransom, a fortune that could make a man or break him. And at the center of this impending storm was a man named Alan Pace. He wasn't a mastermind, not in the cinematic sense. He was a supervisor, a trusted man. He'd worn the Dunbar uniform for years, his face a familiar and reliable one in the depth. He knew the routines, the vulnerabilities, the silent unspoken trust that is the true security of any operation. He knew the guards, their habits, their strengths, their weaknesses. He knew when they would be at their most complacent, lulled by the monotony of a quiet weekend shift. That knowledge was the key, more valuable than any combination or passcode. I still wonder about that moment, the precise second the idea solidified in his mind. Was it a slow, creeping temptation, born of watching vast sums of money pass through his hands day after day, knowing it was never his? Or was it a lightning strike of avarice, a single clear vision of a life unshackled from alarm systems and time clocks? We'll never know, but we do know that he didn't plan to do it alone. The team he assembled wasn't composed of outside professionals. These were his friends, men from his neighborhood, from his past, men he could trust, or so he believed, bound by shared history and the potent lure of easy money. There was Eugene Lamar, a figure with a criminal record, someone who knew the other side of the law. There were others, Hector Buana, David Duenas, men who saw in Alan's plan not just a score but a way out of their own circumstances. This was their fatal flaw, though they wouldn't see it until it was far too late. You can't build a secret of this magnitude on a foundation of old friendships and desperate hopes. Secrets are corrosive. They eat away at the bonds they're built upon. The plan was deceptively simple, a testament to Pace's insider knowledge. It relied not on brute force but on precision and timing. It was a heist from the inside out. The first move was the most critical, gaining entry. On the night of September 12th, a Friday, Alan Pace was there, working late, or so it seemed. His presence wouldn't raise an eyebrow. He was the supervisor, but his purpose was far from supervisory. Imagine the scene inside, the fluorescent lights humming over the clean, polished floors, the low rumble of the air conditioning, the sense of isolation, of being in a sealed world. The other guards on duty, their routines as predictable as the tides. Pace moved through the depot with a calm that must have been superhuman. He knew the locations of the cameras, the blind spots, the rhythm of the patrols, and he had a key. Not a stolen one, not a forged one, his own. He used it to open a side door, the one near the loading docks. He disabled the alarm on that door, a simple physical bypass he'd likely studied for weeks. And then he let the wolf in. His accomplices, dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured, slipped inside. They moved like ghosts, their footsteps swallowed by the vast, echoing space. There was no shouting, no drama. This was a surgical strike. Pace, the man in charge, became the guide. He led them through the labyrinthine corridors, past checkpoints that should have stopped any intruder dead in their tracks. He was their living, breathing key, neutralizing the fortress's defenses from within. The heart of the operation was the vault room. This is where the tension would have been at its most suffocating. Even with Pace there, the other guards were a potential disaster. The plan for them was brutal, efficient, and cold. One by one, as they made their rounds or took a moment of respite, Pace's crew ambushed them. They used fists, perhaps tools, the violence quick and shocking in the sterile environment. They weren't killed, that was a small mercy, or perhaps a calculated decision to avoid a murder investigation that would bring down an entire different kind of heat. But they were subdued, beaten, and bound with duct tape and zip ties. Their uniforms were taken. The intruders now wore the skins of the very men they were robbing, a grotesque masquerade that added another layer of surreal horror to the night. Think of those men like Eduardo Torres, Samuel Lopez. They came to work expecting a routine shift. Now they were on the cold floor, tasting the metallic tang of their own blood, their world reduced to the sound of their own ragged breathing, and the muffled footsteps of their captive. The betrayal they felt must have been a physical pain, sharper than any blow. It was their colleague, their boss, who had done this. The trust they had placed in the system, and in the man next to them, had been utterly obliterated. With the depot effectively under their control, the real work began. Pace opened the inner sanctum, the cash vault. The door swung open, and there it was. The objective: pallets of money, neat bricks of cash, wrapped in plastic and paper bands. It was a sight that could stop a man's heart. The sheer physical presence of that much wealth is something we can barely comprehend. It's not numbers on a screen, it's weight, and texture, and smell. It represents power, freedom, every fantasy you've ever dared to have. They worked quickly, loading the money into canvas bags and onto cart. They weren't greedy in the moment. They were systematic. They took only the non-sequential, unmarked bills, the ones that would be hardest to trace. They knew what to look for. Pace's guidance was invaluable here. This was where his knowledge paid its highest dividend. They filled bag after bag, a seemingly endless river of currency. Over 18 parts. It took time. The minutes must have felt like hours. Every creak of the building, every distant siren from the city outside, a potential death knell for their scheme. And then they were gone. They loaded the fortune into a waiting vehicle, a nondescript truck that wouldn't attract a second glance. They slipped back out into the Los Angeles night, leaving behind the bound and beaten guards, the empty vault, and the silent, bleeding heart of the Dunbar depot. They vanished, as if they had never been there. The side door was closed. The alarm presumably was reset. The fortress was once again sealed, but now it was a hollow shell. The discovery when it came was one of shock and dawning horror. A guard, managing to work a hand free, triggered a silent alarm. When the LAPD and Dunbar officials arrived, they found a scene of controlled chaos. The bound guards, the ransacked vault, the eerie quiet. The initial assumption was one of sheer, impossible force. How had a team breached this fortress? It must have been a small army, a highly trained crew of outside professionals. The investigation initially spun its wheels, looking for phantom suspects, for tunnels, for sophisticated electronic bypasses they couldn't find. Because the truth was far simpler and far more disturbing. The security system hadn't been hacked by a genius. The doors hadn't been blown open with explosives. The fortress had been opened from the inside. The most sophisticated lock in the world is useless if the man with the key is the one who wants to steal what's inside. I think about the days that followed for Alan Pace and his crew. The initial, dizzying high of success. They had done it. They had pulled off the impossible. They had millions, a mountain of cash, hidden away. They must have felt invincible. The smartest men in the city. They dispersed. They lay low. They didn't flash the money. Not immediately. They were careful, or so they thought. But a secret of this size is a living thing. It needs to breathe. It creates its own pressure. The first mistake was the spending. You can't suddenly come into that much money, even if you try to be discreet, without creating ripples. A new car here, a paid-off mortgage there, a lavish vacation, a sudden investment in a business. The IRS and the FBI have entire divisions dedicated to watching for these ripples. They are the quiet hunters, patient and methodical. They began to connect the dots. The common thread: Alan Pace, the supervisor from the Dunbar depot, and his circle of friends, who were suddenly, inexplicably flush with cash. The second, and fatal mistake was the nature of their bond. These were not hardened criminals used to the code of silence. They were friends, and friends talk. They get drunk together. They argue. Resentments build. When the pressure of the investigation began to tighten, that bond started to fray. The FBI turned the screws. They offered deals, played one against the other. They knew it was an inside job now. They just needed one crack in the wall, and they got it. One of the crew, facing serious time on another charge, saw a way out. He started talking. He gave them names, details, the whole story. The dam broke. Arrest warrants were issued. One by one they were picked up. Alan Pace, the architect of his own downfall, was arrested. The money, of course, was mostly gone, spent, gambled, hidden in places that were never found. Out of the $18.5 million, only about half was ever recovered. The rest simply evaporated back into the shadow economy of the city, a ghost of the fortune that. The aftermath was a series of quiet, anticlimactic courtrooms, plea deals, sentences, the slow, grinding machinery of justice. Alan Pace was sentenced to 24 years. Others received similar terms. Their lives were effectively over, traded for a few months or years of illusory freedom and spent wealth. They became footnotes, case numbers, inmates. But the story of the Dunbar robbery isn't just about the mechanics of a theft, or the eventual capture of the men responsible. It's a darker, more unsettling parable. It's a story about trust, and how fragile it truly is. The real vault that was breached that night wasn't made of steel and concrete. It was made of faith. Faith that the man next to you is who he says he is, that he believes in the same rules, that he values his word, and his loyalty above a stack of printed paper. Alan Pace didn't just steal money, he stole that certainty. I often find myself walking past buildings like the Dunbar Depot. Even now, I look at the high fences, the cameras, the reinforced doors, and I think the most formidable security system in the world is only as strong as the people who operate it. The human heart, with its capacity for greed, for envy, for desperation, is the one variable you can never truly account for. The lock on the door is there to keep the strangers out, but who guards the guard? The Dunbar robbery leaves us with a chilling unanswered question, one that echoes in every bank, every corporation, every place where trust is the final currency. When the lights go out and the doors are locked, who are we really locking in? And more importantly, who are we locking out? The money was never the real prize, and its loss was never the real tragedy. The real loss was the proof that given the right combination of opportunity and pressure, any one of us could be the one to turn the key.